We're going to continue our discussion on the dispositional causes of delinquency by focusing on psychological causes of delinquency in segment 2. So one strain of psychological causes of delinquency is through the lens of abnormal psychology, which kind of presupposes that deviant behavior is caused by abnormalities or disorders in the human psychological structure, which cause the person to act out in deviant ways. There are really two major categories of mental disorders, those that are organic or functioning. The difference between the two is that organic disorders are caused by either organisms or disease, genetic or birth defect, a brain injury, or other physiological factors that affect the normal psychological functioning. It's the notion that there was some type of organic cause to the change in the behavior or functioning. So lots of examples include things like mental retardation, traumatic brain injury, stroke, Parkinson's syndrome, Lou Gehrig's disease, all have associated changes in behavior, which are caused by either a disease, a defect, an injury, or other physiological factor. Functional or functioning mental disorders are not caused by physiological factors. They can include physiological changes, but really it's an interplay between environmental and then psychological or social factors. So the notion is that there's a change in one's physical environment, which may lead to a change in physiology, which then leads to a change in behavior. So, disorders like depression, schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar, borderline, body dysmorphia, antisocial personality, or phobias all start off with, a change to the environment, which kind of changes the physiology, which changes the behavior. So when it comes to functioning mental disorders, psychologists tend to conceive the change in environment as typically stemming from some precipitating event or events, either short-term or long-term. These events either override or disrupt normal psychological processes, which would otherwise prevent the change in behavior. We see examples of this stemming all the way back to some of the original or early theories of psychology. So if you take Freud's theory, there was this conception that, there's a disruption as a child moves through the anal stage, which leads to a change in behavior as an adult, to be more controlling this anal retentive behavior. Today, we don't really focus on things like, Freud's stages, but instead focus on typically stress, right? Stress or trauma. So a stressful life event, either, short-term or long-term, leads to some type of change in behavior, which leads to the disorder and maladaptive behaviors. So when it comes to psychological disorders, it has to do with, behavior that is prolonged or abnormally frequent and disruptive as being indicators of a, psychological disorder. And when we're talking about events or traumas, we're focusing on things like examples being death of a loved one, experiencing interpersonal violence, divorce, or tragic accident. But it's not limited to traumatic events. They can, precipitate from joyous occasions as well that are also act as stressors in one's life, like marriage, birthdays, childbirth, anniversaries, promotions, and graduations. And these disorders occur as a result of biological changes that result in a change in lifestyle as well. So things like menopause, cancer recovery, diabetes, amputations, and degenerations of the body can also be considered precipitating events for psychological disorders. And these events represent situations which all include high levels of stress or trauma, but importantly, we have to remember that all of these events are socially embedded, whether it be a marriage, a birthday, a death in the family, a tragic accident, interpersonal violence. These all occur within the context of a society. Even things like menopause, cancer recovery, diabetes, amputations cause stress as a result of the relationship of the disease with the ability or inability for the person to cope within the societal structure as it currently exists. Psychologists and sociologists both note the caution in using the psychological perspective and thinking about things like delinquency and deviancy. So first we have to remember that about 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health issue within their lifetime. That's 20% of the population will experience some type of mental health disorder. Some studies even put that number at 1 in 4, or 25% of the population will experience some type of mental health crisis during their lifetime. So when we're trying to explain things like delinquency or criminality, we have to remember that the vast majority of people who may experience a psychological disorder don't go on to become criminal. And in addition to that, a very, very large, the majority of people who are convicted of a crime don't necessarily have a mental disorder that can account for their particular form of criminality. So when psychologists apply things like personality tests and rating scales and other things to distinguish deviants or criminals from non-deviants or non-criminals, we find that there's a lack of success in doing so. There's no such thing as a test that's going to ensure with 100% positivity that someone is going to eventually commit some type of crime if they have a mental health issue or disorder. Once again, we have to go back to the critique that deviance is a product of society. So that means that, just as we have a variety of, experiences, a variety of different personalities, and a variety of different psychological traits, we have to remember that what is considered deviant or not deviant is socially determined rather than inherent in the psychological structure of an individual. And so psychology really can't provide the tools for what may be considered deviant behavior versus what may not be considered deviant behavior in any given particular point in history. And in addition to that, we see that there is no one type of personality or one type of personality trait that can absolutely predict whether a person is going to become criminal or not criminal. In the case of juveniles, become delinquent or not delinquent in their behavior. And that concludes our discussion of the psychological causes of delinquency. We'll move on in the next segment to talk about rational choice.